And let's take a look at the next topic in Patrick Odin's book, which has the subtitle of Time, Life, and the Temptations. When studying theology, our spirituality can become work rather than renewal. Indeed, when I was going through seminary and even now, it seems as if my spiritual life and the theology that I'm reading is more work. And so that's a constant temptation. And so a challenge at seminary is trying not to compartmentalize the theological aspect from the spiritual aspect, but trying to find a way in which both can be integrated in an organic way. Because theology, spirituality, life is not you do spiritual work sometimes, more practical work sometimes, and do intellectual theological work at other times, but you constantly want to integrate them together. Seminary is a wilderness. It's a place of testing, challenge, and temptation as you are introduced to new ideas, new forms of criticism, as well as struggling with some of the personal things that you may struggle with, whether it be financial or personal or physical or health-wise as well. But we press forward to take hold of what Christ has prepared for us with the conviction that Jesus Christ has placed us at seminary, has placed us at particular places at particular times, and we have the confidence that there's a reason why Christ placed us there. And so we constantly work and we press forward. And this is what Odin has to say. I really like the way he phrases it. In being faced with the temptations in our particular wilderness, we're faced with coming to terms with the spiritual needs, emotional insecurities, oh man, those insecurities, and everything that will manifest fissure in our future ministries and relationships. Press on despite the struggles, not letting even temptations or frustrations hold one back. And most importantly of all, cling to God, pressing on toward the next step, confront temptations in the grace of God, sometimes failing, but growing stronger as a result. When we are faced with temptations, when we are faced with emotional insecurities or spiritual needs, feelings of inadequacy, feelings of spiritual, intellectual inadequacies, we cling to God. We cling to God, knowing that God's provision is indeed bountiful. You have to learn how to integrate your whole life so that one area, whether it be the intellectual or the spiritual, contributes and bolsters the others. When we read theology, we're not just reading words about God. We're trying to come to terms with God in ways that broadens our understanding and bolsters our hope that this God, is the one who orients our whole life. So ultimately, studying in theology, studying at seminary, is not simply knowledge of God for knowledge's sake, but it's a way for us to really organically, really try to understand and grasp at what God is, who God is, what God has done. So the purpose of this lecture in particular is to try to get a grasp of a concept that, let's be honest, is a little bit confusing, a little bit contradictory, irrational sometimes, and that is, of course, the doctrine of the Trinity. To introduce students to a basic definition of the Trinity, what it is and how it was formulated. So we have that picture right there where we have a triangle, Father, Son, Spirit, each one of which is God, but at the same time, the Son is not Father, the Father is not the Spirit is not the Son. But at the same time, because the Son is the Father, and the Father is the Spirit, and the Spirit is the Son, they're together, united into a triangle under the title of God. So indeed, this idea of the Trinity is quite confusing. So let's try to at least gain some sense of orientation on what it is. So I'll just begin with a very broad question. As a Christian, what do you believe in? And at the very beginning, we said a prayer of the Apostles' Creed. And the Apostles' Creed, which has been recited by Christians for thousands of years, is a very good summary of what Christians believe in. And I highlighted some words: God the Father Almighty, Jesus Christ, his only Son, as well as the Holy Spirit. So in the Apostles' Creed, immediately we are declaring our faith and our belief in the Trinity of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. So once again, we have here, I believe in the Holy Spirit. So as a Christian, what do you believe in? We believe in the Trinity. And we believe the Trinity is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We believe that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, which is three, is also one because they are all God, right? It's one God. But at the same time, this one God is expressed in three: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But at first glance, especially for those people who are not familiar with the Trinity or Christian doctrines, this idea that 3 equals 1 or that 1 equals 3 seems awfully irrational and illogical. This is what C.S. Lewis has to say about it. I'm just going to read through this whole thing because C.S. Lewis has a way of just writing something that's very clear and very beautiful. God is a being which contains 3 persons while remaining one being. So immediately we get a distinction between persons, 3 persons with one being. So this is very, very important. So the word persons is allowed to be multiple. You're allowed to have persons be more than one, and specifically 3. However, this idea of being or essence or ousia, which I'll explain later, has to be 1. The first person is called the Father, and the second the Son. We say the first begets or produces the second, and we talked a little about this during our Christology lectures, where this idea of beget is different from creates, because create, when the Father creates the Son, it automatically creates a sense of hierarchy, with Christ being less than the Father. But with the word begets, there's a sense of equality there. And it's rather a matter of function of what the Father does rather than the Father's essence. We call it begetting, not making, right? Because what he produces is of the same kind as himself. The Son exists because the Father exists. And in the opposite sense, the Father exists because the Son exists. But there was never a time before the Father produced the Son. He is always, so to speak, streaming forth from the Father. And this is the metaphor that I really like light from a lamp or thoughts from a mind. Christ is the self-expression of the Father, what the Father has to say. And there was never a time when he was not saying it. The most important thing to know is that it is a relationship of love. The Father delights in the Son looks up to his Father. What the Christians mean by the statement, God is love. And we talked a little bit earlier about St. Augustine, who conceives of the Trinity and the relationship between the members as a kind of bond of love. It is that the living dynamic activity of love has been going on in God forever and has created everything else. In other words, the life of the Trinity, the life of love of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit that takes place in the Trinity eternally, the outpouring of that, because it's such a great love, it cannot be contained within the Trinity itself, but that love is expressed in creation. That is why the Father sends the Son on earth. And similarly, the Father sends the Holy Spirit on earth. And similarly, Jesus Christ is filled by the Holy Spirit on earth as a matter of doing ministry. And correspondingly, Christians who are united to Christ are also able to, filled with the Holy Spirit, do similar things that Christ did. In Christianity, God is not a static thing, but a dynamic, pulsating activity, a life, almost a kind of drama. Almost, if you not think me irreverent, a kind of dance. One of the temptations of Christian theology is to talk about doctrines and the doctrine of the Trinity and then conceive of it as something that is very abstract, something that is over there and does not really affect what happens down here on earth. But the way Lewis frames it as a kind of dynamic activity, of pulsating activity, it really creates a sense of movement, a sense of activity, so that the Trinity is intimately involved in a dynamic kind of way among us.